what would make you think twice before ever buying a product that was made in China? Would the numerous safety issues stop you? After all, scientists and pundits warn of the dangers of buying Chinese goods. There's high levels of lead in the paint of toys and jewelry. There's mercury in baby formula, and hidden asbestos in drywall. However, despite these hazards, I believe that the question of buying from China is not only one of safety, but also one of morality. Although the low-cost Chinese goods are the staple of today's American consumer market, I wish to persuade you that these products must be avoided due to the brutally lucrative Laogai system through which these products are produced. Now, to do this, I'd first like to explain to you the 21st century abuse of this Laogai system and how the system is inherently corrupt. Then I'd like to address the atrocity or the issue that buying from China creates. And finally, offer an answer, one that combats this Chinese corruption and helps bring the Laogai system to an end. So first of all, let me explain to you the 21st century abuse of this Laogai system. Well, what is the Laogai and how does it work? Merriam-Webster's dictionary explains. The word Laogai comes from the two Chinese words, Lao, meaning labor, and Gai, meaning reform. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, instituted the Laogai in 1959 and continues to use it to this day, not only to systematically repress and reform the thoughts of its citizens, but also to serve as a free labor supply. Imagine that you are a Chinese citizen, eking out a meager survival for you and your family. One evening, as you sit down to dinner, officers from the People's Armed Police, China's police force, enter your home and take you into custody. En route to the holding cell, the officers inform you that your trial is already scheduled. You will meet your judge and your sentence tomorrow. Your crime? You have been a disloyal citizen. Your possession of subversive material, namely a Bible and a few liberal Western books, is enough to garner a decade-long sentence. Of course, if those officers hadn't found those books, there always would have been another crime you had committed, since the Laogai is always hungry for more workers. The next morning, you were convicted almost immediately after a sham trial, adhering to the Chinese judicial system's 99% conviction rate. You were dragged out of the courtroom and delivered in a police van to one of the estimated 1,300 Laogai prison facilities. Once there, your clothes are taken away, and you were given a knee-length coat, a pair of rubber boots, and a pair of latex gloves. You are now one of the estimated 6.8 million Chinese citizens registered within the Laogai system. When prisoners enter the Laogai, they're forced to work. Now, this isn't the light-duty, recompensing community service that prisoners in the United States perform. This is a 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, brutal slavery under inhumane guards, even more inhumane conditions. Han Cheng, former governor of 6 of these Laogai facilities, recalls, there was torture at Illinois. There were beatings. If a prisoner tried to starve himself, the guards would force feed him. But we didn't feed them much, only a daily diet of watery corn and sorghum gruel, and a monthly allowance of 3 ounces of cooking oil. On this pittance of food, prisoners are forced to work 14 or more hours a day. Former prisoner Tong Li recalls the consequences of refusing to work. At the time, I was beaten by a group of inmates instructed by the guards. My food rations were extremely minimal. Guards punished unmet quotas by withholding even more of our minimal food rations. Depending upon the region, these prisoners will produce anything from shoes in northeastern China to technology in southeastern China to foodstuffs such as wine grapes, tea leaves, or fish at Laogai farms spread all over the Chinese countryside. These Chinese exports are produced under the most brutal of circumstances. Laogai survivor and now stateside activist Harry Wu, in his book Laogai, the Chinese Gulag, recalls accounts of prisoners being forced to tan the hides for boots to be exported, being forced to simply stand naked in the vats of the caustic chemicals. In the factories that polish metal, the air that the workers breathe is almost solidified by the amount of aluminum dust left in the air by the poor ventilation systems. Utterly these prisoners produce China's exports under conditions identical to those of the Nazi concentration camps. This is happening now in China, and we need to act. For many of these prisoners, the hope of ever leaving the system is non-existent. Eager to keep its free labor supply, the communist government extends sentences by months and by years for often minor infractions. Unfortunately, however, often the sentence does not have to be extended, as many prisoners die within the first 4 years. Of the estimated 60 million prisoners that have been in the Laogai system since its institution in 1959, the Laogai Research Foundation estimates that over 60% have died or have been executed. Executions are also extremely common as the communist government capitalizes on the lucrative organ donation market, often killing its healthiest prisoners for organ harvesting. Even if a prisoner does manage to survive his sentence, he's often given special work placement and placed back into the same camps and factories and conditions that he experienced when he was under his Laogai prison sentence. The horrors of this Laogai system are countless. Its atrocities are innumerable, yet we continue to unknowingly propagate this problem by purchasing the cheap Chinese goods that are made with the blood, the sweat, and the tears of our fellow, often innocent human beings. This leads me to my second point, that of the atrocity, or the issue that buying from China creates. But first, let me explain to you why I believe that anything marked made in China could be actually made in prison. The Laogai has thousands of camps, farms, and factories spread all over the Chinese countryside. Now, each factory produces a finished product, as well as the components for many other consumer items. As Harry Wu notes in his book, when you buy a Chinese product, chances are that a Chinese prisoner is either the entire product or at least 60% of its components. It's safe to say that if you buy Chinese, you buy Laogai. Now, I say that it is an atrocity because I believe it is a very serious and real moral issue for us in the United States. The Laogai Research Foundation estimates that the communist government makes a 90% profit off of all Laogai-made goods. The workers are unpaid and ill-fed. The factories are unsafe and ill-kept. Every time we purchase a cheap Chinese product, we give the communist government a profit from the abuse of human life. The Chinese government realizes that Americans wish to buy goods that are inexpensive. The only way for them to manufacture such inexpensive items is through the Laogai, where the labor is free and the workers are fettered. American University's Human Rights Group sums up the consequences of this growing demand for cheap domestic products. Quote, the Laogai produces an extremely cheap and highly competitive product to export, providing the People's Republic of China only more incentive to continue the expansion of its Laogai system. This is what our demand for cheap domestic products has caused. We need to act. Why has this issue not been previously addressed? Well, China, realizing the implications if these abuses were known internationally, has kept the entire system labeled under a series of misnomers. The Human Rights Group goes on to note that each Laogai facility has both a private name and a public name. For example, one known facility is called the Shanghai Municipal Prison, but is also listed publicly on the web as the Shanghai Printing and Stationery Company. Now, although China attempts to muddy the water surrounding this brutal system, one thing is for certain. If the demand for cheap Chinese products is not stopped, the Laogai system will only continue to expand. So what can we do about this? How can we stop this 21st century slavery? This brings me to my third point, that of the answer. Now, I realize that avoiding Chinese products seems a daunting task, especially when so much of the available merchandise is in fact Chinese. However, avoiding Chinese products may be easier than you think. The act just requires 2 simple steps. 1. Read the labels on the products that you buy. And 2. Buy from stores or online companies such as MadeInUSA Warehouse.com or BuyAmerican.com that sell products that were only made in the United States. Avoiding Chinese products requires the simple realization that every cent we spend in China's favor is yet another cent that encourages the atrocities of this system. I realize that sometimes American-made or Taiwan-made goods are more expensive. However, I beg you to consider the situation. Let buying from China become a moral issue for you, an issue in which human life must be stood for at any cost. For those of you who wish to go beyond simply boycotting these Chinese goods, there are numerous petitions on the internet asking for signatures to encourage international intervention into this brutal system. Some of these petitions can be found at laogai.org, laogai.org, a website founded by Harry Wu and the Laogai Research Foundation. 21st century abuse of this Laogai system is a real and daunting threat to the very existence of the Chinese people. And every time we purchase a cheap Chinese product, we only serve to further the atrocity of this system. The way you decide today will change the lives of a citizen in China. Let us answer and reveal to the world the true nature of China's Laogai system. Let us answer and act.